Our gospel reading this morning is from Mark. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders, and they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside of a person that by going in can defile, but it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The most familiar icon at Disney World probably is the great big Cinderella castle, right? I mean, it rises over the horizon, and as you approach the park, it's almost as if it's beckoning you to enter into a fairy tale. But that centerpiece castle is, as it turns out, far from what you expect when you get up close and are no longer afar. That is, when you get there, you realize it's not as much as you think. That is, there's no secret staircases or magical nooks or crannies, that sort of thing. It's pretty much a hollow shell, and it's a portal into the theme park. It's like a glorified archway, really, and the outward appearance of it is deceiving. Cinderella's castle has no real heart of its own. And that's the heart of the matter here in our text today in the Gospel of Mark, where two religious groups get together to confront Jesus. Now, these two groups are both experts in the law of Moses, Pharisees who held sway in the hinterlands, mainly the rural parts, especially up north, the Galilee, where this is taking place, and the scribes from the big city of Jerusalem. They share similar views about how to protect the purity of the people by certain ritual practices like, as you heard, hand washing and food washing and utensil washing. Now, of course, many of us do these things now for hygienic reasons more than religious reasons, can anyone say, COVID-19. But these religious leaders notice that Jesus and his disciples aren't washing their hands before they eat, and so they ask him why he does not keep the tradition of the elders. This is halakha in Hebrew, meaning a way to walk or the way to live. The tradition of the elders refers to something more than just the Torah, the books of the law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Now, the law of Moses, when we say that, we might be thinking of the 10 Commandments. This is chief among the commandments, but they number 613 in the Torah. But the elders over time put in place many other everyday practices like hand washing mentioned here, to guard against breaking any of these commandments by inadvertently coming into contact with things that might make you otherwise unclean. And the closer you got to Gentiles, the more likely that would happen. So these practices put a fence around the law, as the rabbis would say. Now, originally, these may have been required only of temple priests in Jerusalem, who were expected to maintain a level of holiness above that of ordinary people. But, and here's a good word, get ready for this, a good word for the Pharisees, who are, it seems like all the time in the New Testament, kind of the whipping boys, right? Well, the Pharisees really democratized the law. That is, they expanded it to where it was expected of the whole community to be a holy people. And so these things were applied to them. In other words, the Pharisees were practicing something a bit like what Baptists claim when we talk about the priesthood of all believers. I'll bet you didn't see that coming. The point of these added ritual practices was that in doing them, it would keep you far enough away from sin that you might not even be tempted by it. Sort of like avoiding bars if you're an alcoholic. Very good strategy, don't you know? The separation promotes purity and reinforces identity, but it can have the shadow side of a distancing that keeps you from contact with the very people that you would want to influence. Well, Jesus' answer is profound. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but it's the things that come out that defile. The real location of impurity, Jesus says, is the human heart. And that's where law-breaking comes from, and that's where a person is defiled. Now, we need to stop here and consider two interpretations of this challenging passage that I think have gotten Christians off track over the centuries. And the first is this: to see this story as a key moment in the transition from Judaism to Christianity that leaves Jews and their rituals behind in favor of Jesus' religion of the heart. Too many Christians, even today, look upon Jews with their continuing obedience to the law and their following of the practices of halakha as practicing a sterile religion. They assume Jews substitute rules for relationship in religion, which blocks the abundant life that God wants to give that is offered through Jesus Christ. Now, Pope Francis got called on this a week or so ago by Rabbi Ratzon Arutzi, the chairman of the Chief Rabbinate's Commission for the Dialogue with the Holy See. Turns out the Pope had preached a homily that had been widely disseminated, in which he said this: the law, Torah, does not give life. It does not offer the fulfillment of the promise because it is not capable of being able to fulfill it. Those who seek life need to look to the promise and to its fulfillment in Christ. Now, I don't know what the Pope meant exactly by those words. I will tell you, I don't think it really sounds like him. He is well known for his generosity and outreach toward Jews and others. But here's the thing about preachers. We produce a lot of words. And a lot of times in a hurry. And we don't always do it carefully or well. And sometimes we regret what we say or the way we say it. And I can tell you personally how embarrassing it is and painful when something I say has been taken in such a way that I didn't intend it, but that it hurts people that I love. And I think Pope Francis failed in this case properly to distinguish content from form, the life-giving law of God from the ways humans sometimes follow the letter and miss the spirit. But sadly, a lot of Christians agree with the statement exactly as he said it. As Christians, we claim that God's promises find us in Jesus. But that means that they come through Israel to us, not around or without Israel. This is not a zero-sum game where the only way for us is to be right is for Jews to be wrong. This kind of thinking has led to atrocities committed against Jews, including a Holocaust that killed 6 million during World War II, and anti-Semitic attitudes from people that continue to believe that Judaism is obsolete and lifeless. If you think that, you probably don't know any observant Jews. In fact, Jews are right now preparing for the High Holy Days in their religious calendar. And what does that entail? It's a time of searing inventory about your inner life that will issue forth in acts of atonement for where they have hurt others along the way. And this is precisely what Jesus is calling for here. And just last night, I watched online as my friend and partner in Faith Commons, Rabbi Nancy Kasten, taught at Temple Emmanuel and spoke precisely of the importance of what she called the Torah of the heart. What we are reading in our text, friends, is a typical argument among Jews about what constitutes a good Jew. Jews differ among themselves about whether only the written law that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai is authoritative, or whether the oral law that has come about since then was really also given to Moses on Mount Sinai and only later written down. Jesus seems to side with those who uphold the written law of God, and he seems to view the oral law as non-binding, although he doesn't reject it. He is certainly not dismissing Torah or breaking away from Judaism by creating a new religion. Now, the second way we get into trouble with this passage is when we say that true faith is a religion of the heart, and therefore external rituals get in the way of authentic spirituality. Ralph Waldo Emerson was one of the giant intellects of another era in New England, and he became so convinced of this idea of a religion of the heart that he decided that in good conscience he could no longer officiate at the table in Holy Communion or receive it himself. But this view of things fails to take account of the power of things themselves. I mean, God made it all, and everything is capable of being a vehicle to communicate. We have bodies as well as minds, and our bodies are tools for remembering. Rituals, therefore, can remind us of things our mind would otherwise forget. So when we do certain things, we experience them more than when we just think about them, right? Like Holy Communion itself. The taste of the wafer and wine, right? The taste of it reminds us of the goodness of God and our salvation in a way that just thinking about it doesn't. The experience is richer by means of the ritual. What Jesus is doing here is actually challenging his accusers of the appearance of piety while concealing the lack of it. They were living outside in rather than inside out. They were more like Cinderella's castle that looked just right on the outside, but didn't have a vitality going on inside. When my wife Kim was at college at Baylor, Now, this is a very fine school, by the way, down the road. This is very many years ago, so you understand what I'm about to say. She did go for 2 years. She ended up in New Orleans at Loyola, and let's pause for prayers for New Orleans right now, right? Anyway, while she was there, she got a little disenchanted with Baptists and to some degree Christians altogether. See, she didn't grow up in a family or a household that was an every Sunday church-going family. And so when she got to Baylor, she didn't make it a point to get up every Sunday morning and dress to go to church. She just got up and time came for lunch. She dressed casually for lunch, and she would go to the dining hall and she'd see all of these girls who were dressed in their Sunday best for lunch, as if they had already been to church. But they hadn't. They just wanted everyone to think they had. This is the hypocrisy Jesus was calling out. The heart of the commandments of God, whether 10 or 613, whether Torah only or including the tradition of the elders, is whether you love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And the two always go together. You can't tell a true Christian by outward appearances only. It's like the potato famine in Ireland during the middle of the 19th century. It was a blight that struck the potato crop, which was the staple of the Irish diet, and it was a bacteria called the Phytophthora infestans. What was diabolical about this was that the tubers themselves looked perfectly normal on the outside, but they were rotting away from the center out. Jesus points us within so that we can live well without. He wants us to examine our hearts because he knows that whatever is in there will come out in our relationship to others. Jesus is not rejecting ritual in religion. He's rejecting ritual as religion. True religion is proved by our love for our neighbor. When the heart is corrupt, it thinks only of itself. When the heart is pure, it lives for others. The will to have our own way without due regard for others is Christian hypocrisy, I tell you. And I think probably a lot of us have been witnessing that at school board meetings all over this state in recent days, right? Where some of the angriest people are confronting school board officials and school board employees, demanding their freedom not to have to mask their children. And I don't think it's a big leap to guess in Texas that an awful lot of those anti-maxer protesters are church-going Christians. So how can that be? This is coming from what kind of heart? A heart of love and purity, or one of defilement? When we attend well to our inner life, it will show up in the general welfare. The common good is sadly uncommon these days, mostly because too many live from the outside in instead of the inside out. Jesus' people, I tell you, are not perfect people. But it should at least be said of us that we are good-hearted. Amen.